Chapter 34-37. The air was thick with tension as Rimuru, Ultima, and their entire army stood on the shores of Veldanava Island, watching as the dark silhouette of Big Mom's fleet approached. The once calm sea had transformed into a battlefield, with both sides preparing for the inevitable clash. Rimuru narrowed his eyes, seeing the massive flagship of Big Mom cutting through the water, leading the fleet with terrifying majesty. "It's time," Ultima muttered, her violet hair flowing wildly in the strong sea breeze. Her eyes locked onto the approaching fleet, fire in her gaze. "Let's make sure they regret stepping foot on our island." Rimuru nodded. "They'll learn soon enough that Veldanava Island isn't a place they can take. Prepare the cannons. Fire the moment they're in range." The soldiers around them jumped into action, manning the heavy artillery along the shore. The creaking sound of the cannons adjusting echoed through the air. Sylphira, Kalis, and Tessa Horizon stood nearby, their eyes fixed on the incoming fleet. "Stay sharp," Sylphira warned. "They won't go down easy, and this will be a long fight." Moments later, the first volley of cannon fire erupted from Veldanava Island. The cannons boomed, sending waves of destruction toward the approaching fleet. Explosions rang out as the cannonballs struck several of Big Mom's smaller ships, causing them to burst into flames or sink into the dark ocean. Cheers erupted from Rimuru's forces, but it was too soon to celebrate. From the enemy ships, the Big Mom pirates retaliated with their own barrage of cannon fire. The shore shook as explosions tore through the defenses, destroying some of the cannons and killing several of Rimuru and Ultima's soldiers. "They're hitting back hard," Kalis called out, standing at the forefront, his massive arms crossed as he evaluated the situation. "We need to focus on their flagship. That's where Big Mom is. They'll be ash before they reach the shore," Sylphira growled, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the coming battle. "I'll handle any who dare step on our land." Kalis gave her a firm nod. "Do what you do best." Through the smoke and chaos, Big Mom's enormous flagship finally came into view, towering over the smaller ships that were now sinking or burning. The ship's figurehead, a menacing grimace, seemed to mock Rimuru and his forces. Standing at the bow of the ship was Big Mom herself, her enormous frame unmistakable. Her wild, flowing hair and menacing smile struck fear into the hearts of lesser men, but Rimuru and Ultima were unfazed. Beside her stood her top officers, Katakuri, Smoothie, and Cracker, all ready for battle. As the flagship reached the shore, Big Mom's booming laughter echoed across the island. "Rimuru, Ultima, you dare challenge me?" Big Mom roared, stepping off the ship and landing heavily on the sandy beach, her massive body shaking the ground. "I'll crush you and take everything you have." Rimuru stepped forward, his expression calm but deadly serious. "You've overstayed your welcome, Linlin. This island, this sea, none of it belongs to you." Ultima grinned darkly, standing beside Rimuru. "We'll make sure this is your last mistake. You might have been an empress of the seas once, but now your time has passed." Big Mom's eyes gleamed with fury, and she raised her massive sword, Napoleon, high into the air. "Let's see if you can back up those words, Rimuru." "Ultima, the Yonko battle begins." With a roar, Big Mom charged, swinging Napoleon down toward Rimuru and Ultima with devastating force. The ground cracked beneath the weight of her attack as both Rimuru and Ultima dodged to the sides, their speed a blur. "Ultima, take the left," Rimuru shouted as he leapt to the right, drawing his blade. Ultima nodded, darting to the left, her violet hair streaming behind her as she prepared to engage Big Mom head-on. With a burst of speed, she launched herself toward the towering Yonko, her blade clashing against Napoleon with a thunderous impact. The shockwave from their clash reverberated across the battlefield, causing the sand to erupt into the air. The sheer force of their combined hockey sent weaker soldiers on both sides stumbling, unable to withstand the intensity. "Is that all you've got?" Big Mom roared, her eyes wide with bloodlust as she pushed against Ultima's blade. "I expected more from you too." Rimuru used the moment of distraction to dart behind Big Mom, aiming for a critical strike. He swung his blade, infused with hockey, aiming for the back of her leg. But with a sudden twist, Big Mom spun around, blocking the attack with her sword, the force of the block sending Rimuru skidding back. "You're fast, but not fast enough." Big Mom cackled. Sylphira versus Katakuri. While Rimuru and Ultima were locked in combat with Big Mom, Sylphira faced off against Katakuri, the second in command of the Big Mom pirates. His future sight hockey made him a formidable opponent, able to dodge most attacks before they even happened. Sylphira's eyes narrowed as she launched herself at Katakuri, her movements swift and unpredictable. She swung her twin blades in a deadly arc, but Katakuri effortlessly dodged, his body morphing into mochi as he evaded her strikes. "You're fast," Katakuri said calmly, his crimson eyes glowing with the power of future sight. "But you can't hit me." Sylphira grinned, her white hair flowing like a wild flame. "We'll see about that." With a burst of speed, Sylphira used her Conqueror's Haki, sending a wave of pressure toward Katakuri. The sheer force of her Haki was enough to make the weaker soldiers around them collapse, but Katakuri stood firm, his eyes widening slightly. "Haki of the Conqueror, huh?" Katakuri said, narrowing his gaze. "This might be more interesting than I thought." Without wasting a moment, Sylphira charged again, this time using her advanced armament Haki to coat her blades in an impenetrable black. She struck at Katakuri with incredible force, the ground cracking beneath them as their Haki clashed. Katakuri barely managed to dodge in time, his future sight warning him of the deadly attack. "You're strong, but I won't go down easily." "I'm not trying to make it easy," Sylphira retorted, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "I want to break you." Kalis vs. Smoothie. On another part of the battlefield, Kalis faced off against Charlotte Smoothie, one of Big Mom's most dangerous commanders. Smoothie towered over him, her massive sword ready to cleave through anything in its path. "You're out of your league, little man," Smoothie taunted as she swung her sword, sending a wave of liquid energy toward Kalis. Kalis smirked, raising his own blade as he activated his advanced observation Haki, predicting Smoothie's movements. He sidestepped the attack with ease, countering with a powerful slash of his own, his armament Haki clashing against Smoothie's. "Out of my league," Kalis grinned, "I'll show you who's really out of their league." Smoothie growled, swinging her sword down with incredible force, but Kalis blocked it with his own, the two clashing with a deafening impact. The force of their strikes sent shockwaves across the battlefield, but Kalis held his ground, his Haki matching Smoothie's blow for blow. "I didn't expect you to be this strong," Smoothie admitted, her eyes narrowing. "But you won't last much longer." "Is that so?" Kalis replied, his eyes shining with determination. "Let's see who breaks first." Tessa Horizon vs. Cracker. Meanwhile, Tessa Horizon was engaged in a fierce battle with Charlotte Cracker. His Biscuit soldiers were overwhelming, but Tessa's mastery of advanced observation Haki allowed her to stay one step ahead of his army. "Your little soldiers won't save you, Cracker," Tessa said, her voice calm and focused. "I can read your every move." Cracker sneered, sending a wave of Biscuit soldiers toward her. "Let's see you dodge this." With graceful movements, Tessa danced through the battlefield, her observation Haki allowing her to predict the soldiers' attacks with ease. She struck down the Biscuit soldiers one by one, her blade a blur as it sliced through the battlefield. "You're going to need more than this to take me down," Tessa said coldly, her eyes fixed on Cracker. Cracker gritted his teeth, summoning even more Biscuit soldiers to his side. "I'll crush you under the weight of my army." Tessa smirked, raising her hand. "I don't think so." With a burst of Haki, Tessa unleashed a powerful strike, cutting through the Biscuit soldiers like they were nothing. Her blade gleamed in the light of the setting sun, and Cracker was forced to retreat, realizing that his usual tricks wouldn't work on her. "You're strong," Cracker admitted. "But I won't go down that easily." Conquerors clash. As the battles raged on around them, Rimuru, Ultima, and Big Mom continued their fierce clash. Each blow they exchanged sent shockwaves across the battlefield, and their Haki clashed with such intensity that the air itself seemed to crack under the pressure. But then, something changed. Rimuru and Ultima's eyes gleamed with a newfound determination, and their Conqueror's Haki flared to life, crashing against Big Mom's like a tidal wave. The ground trembled beneath them, and the sky seemed to darken as their Haki filled the air. The sheer force of their Conqueror's Haki was enough to make even the strongest soldiers on both sides falter. Weaker warriors collapsed to the ground, unable to withstand the overwhelming pressure. Big Mom's eyes widened in surprise as she felt the full force of their combined Haki. "You both have Conqueror's Haki," she bellowed, struggling to keep her footing. Rimuru smirked, his eyes locked on Big Mom. "What did you expect, Linlin? We're not just playing pirate. We're the real thing." Ultima grinned wickedly. "And now, you're going to see what happens when you cross us." The air crackled with energy as their Haki collided in a battle of wills, and the battlefield was consumed by the storm of their power. The battlefield was drenched in chaos. The Tempest pirates and Big Mom pirates clashed with ferocity, the sound of steel meeting steel and the roar of cannons filling the air. Rimuru and Ultima stood side by side, their gazes locked on the towering figure of Big Mom. Her eyes were wild with fury, her massive form a force of nature in itself. The clash of Yonko had begun, and neither side showed any signs of retreating. "Linlin," Rimuru called out, his voice cutting through the noise of the battlefield. This ends today. You're no longer welcome in these waters. Big Mom let out a thunderous laugh, her voice shaking the ground beneath them. You think you can take me down, Rimuru? I am a Yonko. I've conquered seas long before you even set foot on them. Ultima stepped forward, her violet hair flowing in the wind, eyes gleaming with determination. We're not afraid of you, Linlin. You're powerful, but so are we. And today, we're taking everything from you, starting with your life. With that, the battle between the Yonko raged on. Rimuru and Ultima charged at Big Mom with blinding speed, their blades clashing against Napoleon, her enormous sword, with a deafening impact. The sheer force of their strikes sent shockwaves rippling through the air, causing the ground to tremble. Big Mom swung Napoleon with terrifying strength, but Rimuru was quick to dodge, leaping to the side as Ultima rushed in. Her fists crackled with the power of the Gura Gura no Mi, and as she struck Big Mom's side with an advanced armament hockey-infused punch, the air itself seemed to shatter like glass. Big Mom roared in pain, blood spurting from her mouth as she staggered back. The force of the attack had been devastating, and for the first time in the battle, Big Mom looked vulnerable. But despite the blow, she wiped the blood from her lips and stood tall, her eyes burning with rage. You think that's enough to stop me? She bellowed, raising Napoleon high above her head. I'll crush you both, and this island will be mine. Tessa vs. Cracker and Perospero. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Tessa Horizon was locked in a fierce duel with Charlotte Cracker. His army of biscuit soldiers surrounded them, but Tessa's advanced observation hockey allowed her to dodge their attacks with ease, her every movement precise and calculated. Her mind-reading abilities gave her an advantage, and she could predict Cracker's every move. You're strong, but your tricks won't work on me, Tessa said coldly, her sword flashing as she cut down another biscuit soldier. I can see everything you're going to do before you even think of it. Cracker gritted his teeth, summoning more biscuit soldiers to his side. I won't let a little girl beat me, he snarled, sending his army toward her. But Tessa was relentless. She weaved through the battlefield like a shadow, striking down biscuit soldiers left and right. Her blade found its mark, slicing through Cracker's defenses and leaving deep cuts across his body. You're bleeding, Cracker, Tessa said, her voice calm and collected. You're losing. Cracker wiped the blood from his face, glaring at her. Not yet, he growled. Before Tessa could strike again, a candy-like substance wrapped around her legs, locking her in place. She glanced down and saw Charlotte Perospero, the eldest son of Big Mom, stepping into the fray. You didn't think I'd let my little brother fight you alone, did you? Perospero sneered, his candy arm extending toward her. Tessa struggled against the candy restraints, but Perospero's grip was strong. Cracker used the opportunity to regain his footing, a smug smile crossing his face. This is where it ends for you, little girl, Cracker said, readying his sword. But Tessa's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. I'm not done yet. With a burst of hockey, Tessa shattered the candy holding her in place and darted forward, her blade clashing against Cracker's. The fight was far from over, but with Perospero in the mix, the battle had become much more difficult. Kalis vs. Smoothie. On another part of the battlefield, Kalis faced off against Charlotte Smoothie. The towering woman was a formidable opponent, her sword easily matching Kalis' own in strength. Their battle was a deadly dance, with neither side willing to back down. Smoothie swung her sword with incredible force, the blade humming through the air. Kalis barely managed to block the attack, his observation hockey allowing him to predict her movements just in time. The ground cracked beneath them as their weapons collided, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. You're strong, Smoothie admitted, her eyes narrowing. But you can't keep up with me forever. Kalis smirked, his grip on his sword tightening. We'll see about that. Smoothie lunged at him again, her blade aimed for his chest. But Kalis was faster. Using his advanced observation hockey, he sidestepped her attack and found an opening. With a swift and precise movement, he slashed at her arm, his sword cutting deep. Smoothie's eyes widened in shock as her left arm was severed from her body, blood spraying across the battlefield. She let out a scream of pain, staggering back as she clutched the bleeding stump where her arm had been. You bastard! Smoothie growled through gritted teeth. Kalis didn't respond, his eyes cold and focused. He knew this was his chance. With Smoothie wounded, the battle had tipped in his favor. But he also knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. Sylphira vs. Katakuri. The battle between Sylphira and Katakuri was perhaps the most intense of them all. Both warriors were masters of their craft, and their fight was a blur of speed and power. Katakori's future sight hockey allowed him to dodge most of Sylphira's attacks, but Sylphira's advanced armament hockey gave her the upper hand in close combat. "You're not bad," Katakori admitted, dodging another of Sylphira's powerful strikes. "But you're not going to beat me." Sylphira grinned, her white hair flowing around her as she swung her twin blades at Katakori again. "We'll see about that." Their blades clashed with a thunderous impact, sending sparks flying into the air. Katakori dodged, his mochi-like body morphing to avoid her attacks, but Sylphira was relentless. She moved with incredible speed, her blades cutting through the air with deadly precision. "You can see the future, but can you stop it?" Sylphira taunted, her eyes gleaming with confidence. Katakori's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He could see her movements before she made them, but Sylphira's attacks were fast and unpredictable. It was becoming harder for him to keep up. As their battle raged on, Sylphira managed to land a glancing blow on Katakori's arm, drawing blood. Katakori's eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time, he looked unsettled. "You're bleeding," Sylphira said with a smirk. "Looks like I'm winning." Katakori clenched his fists, his mochi transforming into spiked clubs. "This isn't over yet." The tide turns. As the battles raged on across the battlefield, it was clear that both sides were giving it everything they had. But with Rimuru and Ultima leading the charge, and their powerful generals fighting on the front lines, the tide of the battle had begun to turn in their favor. Tessa, Kalis, and Sylphira were pushing their opponents to their limits, and with each passing moment, the Big Mom pirates were being driven back. But the war was far from over, and the final clash between Rimuru, Ultima, and Big Mom had yet to reach its conclusion. The outcome of this epic battle would determine the fate of Veldanava Island, and the Tempest pirates would stop at nothing to protect their home. The battlefield was a cacophony of sound, clashing swords, roaring cannons, and the fierce yells of warriors locked in mortal combat. But at its center, an even greater storm brewed. Rimuru and Ultima, standing side by side, faced the formidable Yonko, Big Mom. Her massive frame loomed over them, bloodied but unyielding, her eyes burning with unrelenting fury. Despite the deep cuts across her body and the bruises marking her flesh, she refused to fall. "Lin, Rimuru said, his voice calm but firm, "this is over. You can't win this." Big Mom bellowed in rage, the earth beneath her feet cracking from the force of her anger. "You think you've won? You haven't seen anything yet." She swung Napoleon with immense force, but both Rimuru and Ultima, their observation hockey fully honed, dodged the attack with ease. The massive blade smashed into the ground, sending debris flying into the air, but it missed its targets entirely. "You're getting slower," Lin, Ultima taunted, her violet hair flowing as she effortlessly evaded another wild swing from Big Mom. "Your strength is fading." Big Mom's eyes flared with wrath as she lunged again, this time sending a shockwave through the ground beneath them. But Rimuru's hockey foresaw the attack, and he was already airborne before the ground erupted where he had been standing. "Stop running," Big Mom roared, her voice filled with frustration. "Fight me." "We are," Rimuru said as he landed gracefully, his sword glowing with advanced armament hockey. "But this fight is no longer in your favor." Ultima cracked her knuckles, her fists coated in the black sheen of advanced armament hockey, and grinned. "Let's finish this." Tessa vs. Cracker and Perospero. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Tessa Horizon was locked in a fierce struggle. Cracker and Perospero had teamed up against her, the two Big Mom commanders pressing her hard. Biscuit soldiers swarmed around her, and Perospero's candy traps kept appearing at her feet, forcing her to stay light on her toes. It was becoming a more difficult battle with each passing moment, and she was beginning to feel the strain. Cracker laughed as he swung his massive sword, the force of his blow sending a shockwave through the air. "You thought you could take on both of us? You're outnumbered, little girl." Tessa dodged the attack, using her advanced observation hockey to anticipate Cracker's movements. She darted through the battlefield, slicing through Biscuit soldiers with precision and avoiding Perospero's sticky candy traps. "I'm not outnumbered," Tessa said, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "You're just in my way." She moved swiftly, her mind-reading ability giving her an edge as she anticipated both Cracker's and Perospero's attacks. But it was Cracker who left himself open first. As he lunged forward with a wide swing, Tessa sidestepped, her blade glowing with armament hockey. She thrust her sword forward with lightning speed, piercing Cracker's chest. Cracker's eyes widened in shock as Tessa's blade dug deep, and in one fluid motion, she ripped the sword upward, slicing through his heart. Cracker let out a strangled gasp, blood spilling from his lips as he crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Sparrow's eyes widened in horror as he saw his brother fall. Cracker. No. Distracted by his grief, he didn't see Tessa coming. With lightning speed, she dashed toward him, and before he could react, her foot connected with the side of his head in a powerful kick. Sparrow's head snapped back from the impact, his body tumbling to the ground. He lay motionless, unconscious. Tessa took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from her brow. That's two down, she muttered, her eyes scanning the battlefield. Who's next? Kalis versus Smoothie. Elsewhere, Kalis stood victorious over the towering figure of Charlotte Smoothie. The fight had been brutal, but Kalis had gained the upper hand once he severed Smoothie's arm. She was bleeding heavily, her once formidable strength now faltering. You're tough, I'll give you that, Kalis said, his voice steady as he circled her, his sword still raised. But you're not walking away from this. Smoothie, breathing heavily and clutching her bleeding stump, glared at Kalis with hatred burning in her eyes. You think this is over? You won't get away with this. Kalis shook his head. You're already beaten. With a swift movement, he lunged forward, his blade slicing through the air. Smoothie tried to dodge, but Kalis was faster. His sword cut through her leg, severing it cleanly. Smoothie let out a scream of pain as she collapsed to the ground, her massive body shaking with the impact. Blood pooled around her, and she gritted her teeth, trying to remain conscious. She spat, but before she could finish, Kalis delivered a powerful punch to her head, his fist coated in armament hockey. The blow connected with a sickening thud, and Smoothie's eyes rolled back as she lost consciousness. Kalis stood over her, breathing heavily. That's another one down, he muttered, his eyes scanning the battlefield for the next fight. Sylphira versus Katakuri. On the far side of the battlefield, Sylphira and Katakuri were locked in a battle of titans. The two fighters were evenly matched, their observation hockey allowing them to predict each other's every move. Katakuri's future sight hockey was formidable, but Sylphira's mastery of advanced armament hockey gave her a slight edge in the battle. You're good, Katakuri admitted, his voice calm despite the strain of the fight. But you won't beat me. Sylphira smirked, her white hair flowing around her as she circled Katakuri. We'll see about that. The two fighters exchanged blows with incredible speed, their fists colliding with the force of cannon fire. Katakuri's mochi-based attacks were fast and unpredictable, but Sylphira's advanced hockey allowed her to counter them with devastating precision. For a moment, it seemed the battle was at a stalemate. But then Sylphira saw her opening. As Katakuri lunged forward with a powerful punch, Sylphira sidestepped, her fist glowing with advanced armament hockey. She drove her fist into Katakuri's stomach, the force of the blow causing the ground to tremble beneath them. Katakuri's eyes widened in shock as the air was knocked from his lungs. He gasped, clutching his stomach as he staggered back, blood spilling from his mouth. Sylphira didn't give him a chance to recover. With another powerful punch, she struck him in the same spot, sending him crashing to the ground. Katakuri lay there, unconscious, his body motionless. Sylphira stood over him, breathing heavily but victorious. Looks like I win, she said, wiping the sweat from her brow. The final battle, Rimuru, Ultima versus Big Mom. As the battles across the battlefield reached their conclusions, the focus shifted back to the most intense confrontation of all, Rimuru and Ultima against Big Mom. The air around them crackled with energy as the three titans clashed, their conqueror's hockey shaking the very foundations of the island. Big Mom, bloodied and bruised but unbroken, let out a feral roar. I won't lose to you, she screamed, swinging Napoleon in a wide arc. The force of her attack sent shockwaves through the air, but once again, Rimuru and Ultima dodged with ease, their advanced observation hockey predicting her every move. You're getting weaker, Linlin, Rimuru said, his voice calm and measured. This fight is over. Ultima stepped forward, her fists crackling with the power of the Gura Gura no Mi. We've already won, you just haven't realized it yet. Big Mom snarled, her eyes wild with fury. I'll kill you both. But as she lunged forward, her movements were slower, her strikes less precise. Rimuru and Ultima moved in perfect harmony, dodging her attacks with ease and countering with devastating blows of their own. Ultima, her fist glowing with armament hockey, struck Big Mom in the side with a powerful punch, the force of the blow causing the ground beneath them to crack. Big Mom staggered, blood spilling from her lips, but still, she refused to fall. Rimuru, his sword glowing with the same hockey, slashed at her arm, cutting deep into her flesh. Big Mom roared in pain, her grip on Napoleon faltering. You can't win, Rimuru said, his voice firm. This is the end for you. Big Mom's breathing was ragged, her massive body shaking from the pain and exhaustion. But even in her weakened state, her will remained unbroken. I am a Yonko, she growled, her voice filled with defiance. I don't fall. Ultima's eyes gleamed with determination. You do today. With one final, devastating strike, Ultima charged forward, her fist coated in advanced armament Haki and empowered by the Gura Gura no Mi. She drove her fist into Big Mom's chest, the force of the blow shattering the air around them. Big Mom let out a gasp, blood spilling from her mouth as she fell to her knees. Rimuru stood beside Ultima, his sword at the ready. It's over, Linlin. Big Mom's eyes were filled with shock as she looked up at the two of them. For the first time in decades, she had been bested. She collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The battlefield fell silent as the remaining soldiers, both friend and foe, stared in awe at the sight of the fallen Yonko. Rimuru and Ultima stood victorious, their breathing heavy but their resolve unshaken. Rimuru stood over the fallen form of Big Mom, his eyes cold and calculating. He looked down at her massive figure, now lying still on the battlefield, and his expression remained unreadable. There was no remorse, no hesitation in his movements. It's time to end this, Rimuru said flatly, his voice hard as steel. Ultima, standing beside him, gave a firm nod. Her violet hair fluttered slightly in the wind as she gazed down at Big Mom's lifeless form. Finish it, Rimuru. We don't leave loose ends. Without a second thought, Rimuru unsheathed his blade and infused it with armament Haki. The blackened blade gleamed ominously as he raised it above Big Mom's chest. This isn't about mercy or hesitation, Rimuru stated, his voice filled with authority. We rule Veldoria Island with strength, and we won't tolerate any threats to our reign. She dared challenge our power, and now she will pay the price. Ultima's smile widened as she watched him. That's right, we're not here to play fair. We crush anyone who stands in our way. With a swift and decisive motion, Rimuru drove his sword through Big Mom's chest, piercing her heart. Her body jerked slightly before falling limp again, the finality of the act resonating through the battlefield. Blood poured from the wound, staining the ground, but Rimuru's expression remained cold and focused. The Soru no Mi belongs to me now, Rimuru declared, his voice devoid of any sentimentality. And with this power, we solidify our rule even further. Ultima looked at him, clearly impressed. You've done it. Now no one will question your authority. Rimuru didn't smile. He turned, his eyes surveying the remaining Big Mom pirates, now leaderless and demoralized, stood huddled together. Their expressions were grim, knowing they faced an uncertain fate at the hands of the Tempest pirates. Rimuru turned to Ultima, wiping the blood off his blade. We'll let the survivors go back to Toto land, he said coldly, but we make one thing clear, this territory belongs to us now. They don't come back. Ultima smirked, her violet eyes gleaming with satisfaction. And if they do return, she said darkly, we won't be so merciful next time. Rimuru's gaze then shifted to Katakuri, who was being held in chains by Sylphira. The once proud and feared commander of the Big Mom pirates stood tall despite his defeat, his face emotionless, though his eyes betrayed a hint of resignation. He knew the consequences of his loss. This one, however, is too dangerous to simply let go, Rimuru said, walking toward Katakuri. His expression hardened as he stared into the eyes of Big Mom's second-in-command. Katakuri, you're strong, too strong to leave free, but not enough to stand against us. Katakuri remained silent for a moment before speaking. You may have won today, he said, his voice deep and calm. But I won't be broken so easily. Rimuru's lips curled into a thin smile. I don't need to break you, he replied. I'm giving you a choice. Ultima stepped forward, arms crossed, her smile matching Rimuru's. You have two options. 1. Rot in the dungeon of our castle for the rest of your life, forgotten, defeated, a relic of a failed empire. She paused for dramatic effect. Or 2. Join us. Katakuri's eyes narrowed. Join you. Rimuru nodded, stepping closer. You can become part of the Tempest Pirates as a sub-general. With your strength and abilities, you'd be invaluable to our cause. We're building something far greater than Big Mom ever could. Or, he let the word hang in the air for a moment, you can stay in the dungeons and watch as the world moves on without you. Sylphira tightened her grip on Katakuri's chains, her eyes gleaming with disdain. It's more mercy than you deserve, Katakuri, she muttered, clearly unsympathetic. Katakuri clenched his jaw, visibly torn. He had spent his entire life under Big Mom, loyal to his family, loyal to her empire. But now, that empire was shattered, his mother dead, and his siblings defeated. What future did he have? He stared down at the ground for a moment, contemplating his fate. Rimuru watched him closely, knowing the weight of the decision. You're not the type to sit idly in a cell, Katakuri, Rimuru said, his voice steady but persuasive. We can offer you more than just survival. We can offer you a place in a crew that will shape the world. But only if you're willing to make the right choice. There was a long silence as the tension hung thick in the air. The Tempest pirates waited with bated breath for Katakuri's answer, while the remaining Big Mom pirates stood in the distance, knowing that their fate was sealed. Either they would return to Todo Land as defeated remnants or watch their former commander align with their enemy. Finally, Katakuri lifted his head, his eyes locking with Rimuru's. I'll think about it, he said, his voice resolute but distant. He wasn't ready to submit, but he wasn't dismissing the offer outright. Rimuru nodded. That's all I ask. Take your time to decide, but remember, the longer you wait, the more irrelevant you become. Sylphira tugged on Katakuri's chains, pulling him toward the ship where he would be transported to the dungeons beneath the castle on Veldanava Island. You'll get to enjoy the comforts of our cells while you make up your mind, she said mockingly. As Katakuri was led away, Ultima turned to the remaining Big Mom pirates. As for the rest of you, she said, her voice laced with authority, you're free to return to Todo Land, but spread the word, this territory is under the rule of Rimuru and Ultima. Should any of you set foot here again without permission, you'll meet the same fate as your captain. The pirates nodded nervously, too shaken to argue. They knew they were no match for the Tempest pirates now, not after witnessing Big Mom's fall. One by one, they boarded their ships, carrying the wounded and defeated members of their crew, and set sail for Todo Land, their once proud fleet now reduced to shadows of their former selves. As the last ship departed, Rimuru and Ultima stood side by side, watching them disappear over the horizon. Ultima grinned, the thrill of victory still fresh. We did it, she said, her voice filled with excitement. Big Mom is gone, and the rest of the world will soon know it. Rimuru nodded, his expression more measured but no less satisfied. The new world is changing. We've taken our first step toward dominance. And Katakuri? Ultima asked, glancing back toward where he had been taken. Rimuru smirked. He'll come around. He's not stupid. He knows his best chance for survival and relevance is with us. Ultima's grin widened. And if he doesn't, then he'll rot in that dungeon until the world forgets his name, Rimuru replied coldly. Either way, he's not a threat anymore. With the battle won and their victory assured, Rimuru and Ultima turned their attention back to Veldanava Island. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. With Big Mom's territories now under their control, they were poised to become even stronger, their influence spreading across the new world like wildfire. To be continued.